You, of course, caused a bit of controversy when your report back in, I think it was 2022, claimed that Britain wasn't institutionally racist. Do you stand by that?
Yeah, and I think that one of the things I want to sort of dispel a myth really about the fact that we never really said that, you know. I mean, sometimes these urban myths go around. What we did find was that, in fact, the whole notion of institutional racism wasn't really defined. I don't know if you know what it means, Sophie, but I mean, a lot of people don't know what it means and they throw it around like confetti. So what we did, we just parked it and we just used our own framework to understand the racial disparities that were in Britain. And one of the things about doing that is that obviously some people held on to it almost like a religion, but it's not. And I think that what you've got to do with something like that is admit that racism does exist, but also acknowledge where the disparities are and actually sometimes the reasons behind that. And for us, the big thing was that we said that, you know, look, when we looked at the numbers, the white group was causing the most, you know, had the most problems in terms of that issue. And I think that that was the thing that really stirred it, on top of everybody being, I think, almost kind of, let's say, on the elixir of George Floyd, and they weren't focused enough.
What do you mean when you say some white groups had the most problems?
Well, if you're looking at really the issues in education, in employment, and health, the numbers showed that, in fact, white groups were doing worse than any other ethnic group. You know, and so that was our task.
White working class, because not white groups as a whole, right? No, you know, white wealthy kids probably do very well, right?
That's right. White low-income groups. That's the key, and I think that for that, also the more interesting thing was there were greater disparities between ethnic minorities within that than there were, you know, between white and black. So, for example, a taxi driver from Bradford, from a Pakistani background, is a world away from a doctor from an Indian background in Harrow. They're just not the same thing. And so we decided to get rid of this horrible term called BAME, Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic, and say, look, you have to look at the numbers. And that's what we did.
Over the summer, of course, we saw people taken to the streets, setting fire to hotels in some case where they thought asylum seekers were. Were the riots racist?
I think you have to look at the fact that people have to have two things in mind here. Yes, you have to call out racism when you see it. There's no doubt about it. Somebody barricading people in a hotel who are from a particular group, and that had a racial motive. Of course it did. However, you have to also ask yourself the question, why were there protests from a particular group and from a particular geographical area in England?
Because I'm interested in that, because some people would say we shouldn't look at the motivation of the riots because it's basically far-right thugs. It's not political, it's thuggery, it's people being whipped up on hooliganism, WhatsApp groups or whatever. We're almost dignifying it too much if we look at the right reasons.
It reminds me of how we use that term institutional racism. Politicians get up and they use these terms. You probably interrogate them. They far right. What does that mean? There are probably white people listening to this programme now who have got serious concerns. They're in low incomes. They're going to poor schools. They've got the worst outcomes in health, and they've got real. And also the issue of migration.
But they would probably hate the rioters more than anyone because it's in their communities, right?
I would put it this way. I would say that the best analogy is to look at it this way. So look at the fact that these riots, in a sense, the other issues and the things that I called out back in 2021 was like, in fact, the fox being allowed into the chicken coop. But what we did was we just opened the gate, and for those kind of nefarious groups to come in and really cause disaster. But the issue was that there was still an issue. You see what I mean? But we've allowed these other groups to come in and take charge because we were not listening to people.
What's your message to Keir Starmer? He's got a new administration. He's come off the back of this summer of rioting, of discontent. What should he be focusing on now?
You know what he should be doing? His bedtime reading should be my report. You know, and he should be listening and go back to that and stop being ideological about it and look at the chapters that talked about the fact that the greatest disparities we're having in this country are geographical. All those areas on the south coast, in the north, where we've neglected over the years, particularly in education, we've got to do it. London cannot be the centre of everything. We can't have all the goodies here and not actually then cater for the rest of the country. That's the message.
it's interesting you mention education. I mean, some might say that actually the policy to charge private schools VAT and then reinvest that money in state schools, that's the kind of thing, would you welcome it?
I think that, the issue is, I think that's one thing, that's a strategy, but that's not really the real problem here. What we've got to get to the heart of is that, in fact, we are in a context where I think that we're looking at, for example, let's look at education itself and the curriculum. One of my recommendations on history, the Labour government just decided that they're going to abandon it. And what that recommendation was about was how do we have a more inclusive curriculum that talked about the positives of Britain and the positives of their influence. You can't end up with an education system that makes white kids feel totally ashamed, and they've got nothing to do with that colonialism, and makes black children feel, in a sense, that because of that past, they lose their confidence.
It's pretty controversial, though, isn't it? I mean, if you're talking about the positives of colonialism, some people would say, look, No,
I didn't say the positives of colonialism. I said the positives of Britain's history.
Right.
And Britain has given a lot to the world that's positive, from Magna Carta all the way through. It's not just one piece of history. And why are you going...
We still teach this, don't we, in schools? Magna Carta, stuff like that?
No, we don't. We don't. We just you pick up any kid on the road now and ask them to just give you 4 or 5 names of the kings and queens of England, they'll struggle. And that's the fact that we look, let me just say one thing. We have decided as a country to make England and being British, being ashamed of it. We have an England manager that can't even sing the national anthem. And I think that what we've got to do is have an education...
England manager who can't sing the national... I mean, I'm quite interested in that because you're talking about the new guy who said that he doesn't feel comfortable singing the national anthem. That's his personal choice, though, some might say, right?
No, sorry, let me tell you. If you go around the world today, every single country, I've just come back from Jamaica, every single kid in a country is proud to be in their country, and they will sing their national anthem.
But that's not true. You look at the Euros, half the players weren't singing the national anthem. Some of them are focusing on the game.
Fair enough, but I mean, he went out and made a statement that he was going to do that. That's the thing, really, was the England manager, the person who's in charge. And I think it's a wider thing than that. It's about the fact that somehow we have a politics and ideology in this country that says we're ashamed to be British. And I think that that's the problem we're having in our schools. You can't then talk to the majority of the country and say, oh, we're going to teach you how to look at Britain and be ashamed of it. That's not going to fly.
I'm interested in your view on the Conservative leadership contest that is going on now, because there's been a bit of a debate, shall we say, around some of the candidates, candidates and comments that they've made. Robert Jenrick, for example, talking about pro-Palestinian marches, and he was on Sky News and he said, I thought it was quite wrong that somebody could shout Allahu Akbar on the streets of London and not be immediately arrested.
I don't know. Personally, I'm backing Kemi Badenoch.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm backing her because one of the things she did do with that report was she was the only one, really, that championed it and went out there and said, look, this is for a unified Britain, not a diversified Britain. And I thought that was a great message from her. So I like her, I'm backing her, and I think she's going to win. Do
you think she's going to win then, yeah?
Sure.
Confident?
Yeah. About time we had yet another woman leading the country from the Conservative Party.